Okay, so hopefully things will record correctly this evening. Good evening, everyone. Got a couple things I'd like to do this evening. I have a slide deck that I sent out earlier today. This comes from a longer session that I do in some of our executive education programs. We have a number of exec ed sessions that we do. Some we do in conjunction with Gartner. And this particular session deals with the notion of IT business alignment. And the reason I think it's very appropriate for this program, we talk repeatedly about enterprise architecture as being a mechanism for alignment. But I want to kind of step back a little bit and take a look at this notion of alignment and take a look at some of the roots in the alignment literature and how the alignment debate has been traditionally framed, and then talk about some more recent views on alignment that are just starting to emerge now that I think perhaps are maybe grounded a bit more in experience and reality than perhaps some of the alignment models and arguments have been in the past. So let's get started. Then I want to have some discussion at the end, and then talk briefly about the draft paper that I sent out today as well. Now we'll talk more about that at the end of the evening. So let's get started. I'd like to start with a Dilbert cartoon. I think Dilbert hits the nail on the head many times, and I think we all feel like we live in a Dilbert cartoon sometimes. This is one on strategy, and give you a second to look over it. It's asking if the plan is aligned with strategy, and if it's not, then go back and rewrite it and make it aligned with strategy. I'm sure you've run into many similar things like that. But there have been studies done by Michael Porter and others that in most organizations, less than 5% of the people in the organization actually understand the strategy. So we're trying to align with things that in most organizations, a very small percentage of the people actually understand. So we'll come back to that thought in a few minutes. Okay, according to Michael Porter, and maybe you've heard of Michael Porter. If you haven't, you want some of the business courses in the program. He's a very famous management consultant and author, and he estimates that in roughly 80% of organizations, not just corporations, roughly 80% of organizations worldwide do not successfully execute their business strategies, either an outright failure or partial success. And that in a majority of these cases, it's not because the strategy was bad, but because of bad execution. And Gartner and others cite this failure to execute as a very significant challenge facing all types of organizations. So let's delve into this a bit further. Maybe, here we go. And then according to Gartner, 75%, and some people's statistics will say higher, of IT projects either outright fail or fail to achieve some or all of their desired business objectives. So it's not surprising if you link those things together traditionally that we've got a problem with strategy execution and that we have a high failure rate of projects. So then it's not surprising that people argue that there's a lack of IT business alignment, and that's often cited as a major contributing factor to poor strategy execution. If we could just get the IT folks better aligned with business, we'd have better successful projects and probably better strategy execution. That's the argument some have historically made. But the question we're going to ask tonight and delve into is business IT alignment, the real holy grail. Is that the thing we should be striving towards? And we've been trying to align IT and business for well over 20 years, and I would argue in many organizations we're not much better aligned today than we were 15, 20 years ago. So let's look at, this is a little funky here. Okay. So what is alignment? There's a plethora of research that has been done over the last 20, 30 years on alignment. Just go out and Google business aligned or any variation of that term, and you're going to find millions and millions of pages. So what is IT business alignment? Is it even possible? And what would it look like if you're aligned? How do you measure it? Can you be partially aligned. So, if it's something that are you either in alignment or out of alignment, or can you be 10% aligned, 30% aligned, 70% aligned? Are there different types of alignment? So these are all questions that, not easily answered when you start looking at the alignment literature. We'll take a look at some different models on alignment and some of how the literature and thinking around alignment has progressed in a few moments. We've talked in 871 about the fact that EA can be that bridge between strategy and execution. So we've talked about this already. Now we want to delve into this a little more. If we can go on to the next slide. We've got our traditional practice areas or traditional domains in enterprise architecture. I won't take too much time to go over this slide. We've seen slides like this and similar slides many times before. But we've got our traditional focus areas for enterprise architecture and the traditional process that we look at from going from current state to the desired future state and everything that we need to do in between to get from current to future state. It's a little funky. There we go. I'm not quite sure. I'm not responding for every click, or it goes too far. This is a graphic from Gartner, and I think you saw it in 871 as well. Challenging the alignment worldview. So the traditional alignment worldview, where we're trying to align IT with the rest of the business, I think is fundamentally conceptually flawed. That's assuming IT's out here and the rest of the business is over here, and that IT is the thing that's typically out of alignment with business. So does IT need to be any better aligned than marketing, than in accounting or finance or any other part of the organization? A more contemporary, I think a more modern view is the view that we see on the right-hand side, where IT is another part of the business. It's got to be as aligned or as every other part of the business. It's not this separate thing that's out here, and we really need to treat it separately from how we think about all the other parts of the business. But I think the traditional alignment way of thinking, the traditional alignment arguments foster this view that IT's out here and the rest of the business. And honestly, I think our educational system, I'll just get on a tangent here for a second. It's kind of a pet peeve of mine. I think our educational system also fosters this separation. If you look at where IT programs at an undergraduate level are typically housed, it's not in the College of Business. It's in typically computer science or engineering. So what's that mean? That means your IT folks probably take very few business courses, if any. And then conversely, and the trend in business schools today is to not have much of any IT education. MIS, which I think that's a dated concept, dated programs for the most part, they're being phased out in many universities and not really replaced with anything. You might have a smattering of spreadsheet and database classes here and there, but nothing of any substance in many cases. So as a result, what we see, your business school students, the folks in marketing, accounting, finance, et cetera, and operations, they're not getting much in the way of IT or a good understanding of what IT can do to the business and enterprise technologies. It's more than just a spreadsheet. We're talking a whole different level of education that could be done in business schools, but by and large isn't done today. So you get accounting folks that understand what the marketing folks do. They understand what the other parts of the business do, but they don't really understand what IT does. Nor do the IT folks, by and large, because they haven't had many classes, if any, in business, really are able to talk and communicate and understand what the other parts of the organization really do. So I think this is a fundamental flaw in the way many of our colleges and universities are structured. And I'm not quite sure what to do about it, but I see that as a kind of a fundamental flaw that really supports this alignment paradigm and doesn't really put IT as just another part of the business. If it was, it'd be another robust department in most business schools, which it's not today. So, okay, I'll get off my soapbox there. I think that's an issue we really need to address in the long term. Okay. In 871, we took a look at Len Susskind's model from the Open Group, where he suggests a replacement from the traditional stack that we use or are used to in enterprise architecture with terms that are meaningful to all parts of the organization, not just in IT. So, and again, this is still a work in progress. It's far from universally embraced or adopted, but it shows you where some of the thinking's starting to go, that if enterprise architecture is really going to be architecture for the entire enterprise, we've got to think, analyze, and be able to talk in terms that the rest of the organization understands and values. And that's kind of where Len's going with that model. And just a little more on Len's model. I'm not going to take too much time and go over this. We took a look at this in 871, and if you have any questions, I'd be happy to connect you with Len. So just moving on from there, let's take a look at some of the literature in alignment and where we started out, and some of the articles that have just come out in the last couple of years that I think are really debunking some of our traditional notions of alignment, and I think rightfully so. Okay, alignment, most people say it goes back to the Henderson model in 1993. You could argue it goes back before that. But usually the Henderson model, if you see it published, most people cite the Henderson model. This gets used over and over again in the alignment literature. And, we'll talk a little bit about this in a few moments or get into some more details on the Henderson model. But essentially what this model is saying is that there's an inability to realize value from IT investments, and that's primarily due to the lack of alignment between business and IT strategies of the organization. That the business and IT strategies are not aligned, and that's the major problem that we need to address. And then a few years after, we had about a decade of Henderson's model and other people writing about alignment, obviously, in that time frame. But then another major milestone in this path, and you can argue that there's other milestones. You might say, well, why didn't you talk about this article or that article? I'm just going to hit some of the major things that have happened over the last 20 years or so, or the major publications. That doesn't mean this is all encompassing by any means, but some of the things that I think really stand out. And one of them is Nicholas Carr's. I think we can all, most of us remember where we were the day that article came out, or the first day that you found out about that article, if you were working in IT at the time. IT doesn't matter. It just sent so many shockwaves through the IT community at the time. And essentially, Carr's backed off on that since this article came out in 2003. But essentially, what he was saying at the time is that IT is important, but it's becoming a commodity, and that could be outsourced. Now he's kind of backed off on that, and I think rightfully so. That there are parts of IT that are commodities and can be outsourced, but there's also other parts that are strategic and should be kept in-house. And you can debate on which parts are commodities and which parts are more strategic, but I think he's backed off on that position somewhat over the years. Then next, 2007, so we'll fast forward a few more years, came out through MIT, an article entitled "Avoiding the Alignment Trap." And the heart of this article, the authors claim that a narrow focus on alignment reflects a fundamental misconception about the nature of IT. Underperforming capabilities are often rooted not just in misalignment, but in the complexity of systems, applications, and other infrastructure. So let's take a look at what we mean by that. Okay, the authors of the article make the statement that the alignment prescription could be worse than the disease, and we'll take a look at some charts here and what they mean by that in a few seconds. So one of the findings in this study were that companies in which IT was highly aligned with the business. So and you can argue how they measured alignment. Typically they measured whether they had some questionnaires. Do the IT folks seem to get what you're doing, and are they, enabling your business processes and business capabilities, et cetera. So, again, there's no perfect measure of alignment. I've run into, over the years, I ran into one consulting firm, a small, very small boutique firm that claimed they had the method to measure alignment. And when you looked at it, it was this whole series of questionnaires, interviews. They'd come in, they'd spend, 4 to 6 months, gathering all this data, and then they'd tell you where you're well aligned and where you're not so well aligned, and help you work on mitigation plans. And then the question I had, and they claimed that Gartner was interested in going to buy this process from them, et cetera, and I knew people at Gartner, so I called them up and I said, I don't really get this. It seems like a very lengthy process, and, during this time, conditions are going to change in your organization, especially if you're in a quickly changing industry, your strategy could be changing, et cetera. It almost sounds like they're going to get in there and never leave. Alignment's kind of a moving target. If your strategy is being tweaked and changed and your organization's changing, and they said, we agree. We don't think that we're not interested in that methodology. If they say we are, they're misrepresenting things. We don't get it either. So, and that was the only organization I've ever seen that's even attempted to try to measure alignment. So I'm not, you can argue whether they really were measuring alignment correctly, if there is any such correct measure, which there isn't. So anyhow, so what they found using their method of measuring alignment, companies in which IT was highly aligned with the business but not effective were considerably worse off than companies in which IT was less aligned and merely kept the systems running. So we'll take a look at some charts and what they mean by this in a second. And that companies in what they're calling this alignment trap spent 13% more than the overall average on IT spending. So they were well aligned, but not very effective and good at what they do. But they were in sync with the business, and they actually spent more on IT than IT organizations that weren't well aligned, but more effective at what and better at what they did. So let's take a look at some charts here. Okay, so the authors of the MIT study put forward two primary factors for success in IT. Alignment between the business goals and the IT goals on one of the axes, and then on the other, the efficiency of the IT department delivering the services on time and within budget. So how good were they at what they did? So what's interesting here, if you look at this, you can be highly aligned but not as effective and efficient at what you're doing, and you're going to actually spend 13% more on your overall IT costs than IT organizations that aren't very well aligned, which was interesting. So then if you look at what they call the well-oiled IT, those that are less aligned and highly effective, and then highly aligned and highly effective. What's interesting, most of your organizations fall into the less aligned and less effective. I guess that's not that surprising, but not that many are highly aligned and highly effective, which is a little disconcerting. But what was surprising about this is that the highly aligned organizations that weren't as effective actually spent a lot more on IT and IT expenditures than the less aligned organizations. So let's take a look at some of the reasons why. So some of the recommendations. Eliminate unnecessary complexity, determine what to keep in-house and what to outsource, and create end-to-end accountability and better access to information. Let me go on to the next. Okay, so is there any conflict between what they found? So they're saying that if you're aligning but not that good at what you do, that's actually worse than being misaligned and not that good at what you do, according to that particular study. So is there any conflict between with the MIT findings and the Henderson model? The Henderson model specifies that there's two types of functional integration between business and IT domains. They have a strategic function, alignment of strategy, and then a functional alignment as well. The MIT article is really just looking at the functional integration and doesn't really talk about strategy at all and any type of alignment with strategy. They're looking more at the operations and the functional integration between IT and business. But they didn't really touch the strategy issues whatsoever. So according to the Henderson model, business and IT may be functionally integrated, but if the external and internal components of the IT strategy are out of sync, then the investments in IT do not bring about the intended results. So I think conceptually the Henderson model made sense to people, but nobody really asked, is it possible to align with strategy? Is strategy something that we should be achieving to directly align with? And is that even possible? People just took it for granted for quite a long time that that was the thing to do, and we needed to do that, but nobody was really sure how to do it. Like I said, you couldn't really measure it. There's not any proven alignment methodologies, if you will. People have been looking at enterprise architecture because enterprise architecture allows us to better analyze the organization and better manage our portfolio of projects as an alignment mechanism to be that bridge between strategy and execution. And we'll come back to that in a second. Bring up the next. Why this isn't. Okay, so let's take a look at some questions here. Does alignment lie with strategy? There is hopefully a business strategy, and it might be doable to focus on, core markets, expand new product areas, buy up smaller widget makers, and there's a lot of components of strategy. The business vision translates into a strategy, or strategic plan, to achieve, that vision, whatever that vision is. And eventually all the way down to a mission for the staff to get behind it. If the business strategy is clear enough, it will help decide between two competing projects. So given option A, option B, it should be possible to refer to the business strategy and say that it's better to go with B because it better supports our particular strategy, if it's clear and well understood. Now, there are many different business strategies. This is just a sampling. Many different business strategies. And oftentimes organizations will shift strategies. So you start or strategies get tweaked. Strategies are kind of living mechanisms in and of themselves. So strategy is not static. It gets tweaked and changed in response to business conditions and market conditions. And in some cases, maybe gets changed in its entirety. So strategy is a moving target in most organizations. That's why it's very difficult to align with something that is poorly understood by most people in the organization and is, constantly changing and being tweaked by those that do understand it. So IT strategy and all it entails has to align with the business strategy, right? Or else why have one? Very hard to do. Mentioned this already. Business strategy is a fluid thing. No plan, the old adage, no plan survives contact with the enemy. So we've got a strategic plan, but once it gets out in the marketplace and in global competition, it's got to be changed based on conditions on the battlefield. So it's hard to write a strategy that dictates the direction of things that are expensive and hard to change, like IT platforms and applications, et cetera, based on the business telling IT that next year we're going to leverage key learnings and our core competencies and maximize our customer value by augmenting synergies in the value chain or something to that effect. An IT strategy is a weighty thing to put together. So what's the frame of reference for the IT strategy if it's not business strategy? What should we be striving to align to if business strategy isn't really feasible for us to align with? Okay, so let's go ahead now to 2010. And Gartner came out with an article, Stop Talking About IT Business Alignment and Start Talking About Business Performance. So some of the key findings from this particular article, focusing on the holy grail of alignment, this has been found over time to distract the IT organization from the real work of understanding and promoting the goals and objectives that matter to the rest of the enterprise. Using language that focuses on IT alignment with business is damaging for some of the reasons that we started with, because it really puts IT out here and the rest of the business separate from that, which is not the case. Let's go on to the next slide. So some of the recommendations from this article, and this is back in 2010. Where IT alignment with the business is cited as a goal for the IT organization, replace it with the enterprise goals, driving customer growth, retention, reducing operating costs. We'll come back to that in a few minutes. Stop thinking and talking about the business as something you need to align with, as something you're separate from and not part of. I like the last one, use the head of sales rule. If the head of sales wouldn't say it about the sales function, then don't say it about IT. Then, not to be outdone, same year, Forrester came out with a similar article and findings. So we want to give equal time here. This one's entitled Beyond Alignment, BT Strategic Planning. Those of you that follow Forrester, instead of IT, they've been trying to coin the term business technology, BT. It hasn't really caught on. They still use it. I still see it in Forrester articles, but it hasn't. I think they were hoping that this would catch on and become the new acronym that we're all using, but it just hasn't happened that way. But in this article, some of the key findings. IT doesn't understand the business strategy, and we've talked about this already and some of the reasons why. I think, honestly, it goes back to, as it said, the educational system and how the IT folks traditionally are educated and trained, as well as the business folks. IT strategy design is isolated in many cases from the business strategy design. And, excuse me, CIOs don't measure IT effectiveness with business results, which is a big problem. So they're not measuring how effective they are at what they do with value to the business. I think it's starting to change, but not as quickly as many of us would love. Some of the recommendations. Business savvy year-round. Like you said, IT is part of the business, so you have to show that you understand the organization, understand the business, and adding value to it, and not just on specific occasions. Recruit strategic business thinkers to IT and emphasize the flexibility relentlessly. So again, this is some of the recommendations that Forrester came up with in their article. So we go back to, IT is an integral part of the business, and has to be thought about that way. And the traditional way of thinking of alignment doesn't really foster that inclusion in the business. So if the job of the IT strategy isn't to align with business strategy, so if we make the leap and say, okay, it's not possible really to effectively align or stay aligned with business strategy for some of the reasons we've outlined. So if we're not to do that, then the job of IT is to give the business people as many options to change position, to be a provider of capability. So to give them capabilities, give them options for different courses of action. Capabilities equal competitive advantage when the business strategy is a good one. So IT alone cannot save any business, but if it makes those reactive changes a bit easier and quicker to do, it can give it a competitive advantage. So if all of that makes sense, then it's easier to sell the type of strategy, this type of strategy back to the business as an enabler of business capabilities. So what we're suggesting here, we'll look at in slides, that it makes more sense and it's feasible to align IT to business capabilities. Okay, and the owners of the business capabilities then should be in sync, or better be in sync, with changes in the strategy. So as the strategy changes, different capabilities may need to be ramped up or pared back or eliminated, et cetera. And if IT is in line with the needs of the business capabilities and supporting the business capabilities, that's an alignment that makes sense and is achievable and really can help the IT folks become more of an enabler of the business than trying to do this lofty alignment with strategy that and it's just not possible in most organizations. Not a direct alignment. This is an alignment with the business capabilities that then in turn are hopefully at least for the most part aligned with business strategy. So this is difficult to do where the goal is to align IT merely with the business. In the world of alignment, the customer is the business, and the business is always right. This mindset doesn't allow the CIO and the IT organizations to influence business strategy and help determine which projects have the most business value. And move on to the next slide. Just some examples. So the next step in this journey is to move from an alignment perspective to an engagement and business value perspective. I think that's what many of our organizations are trying to do today. We're trying to engage with the business. And if you remember from 871, we were talking about the value measurement presentations, and we're going to hear a little bit more from Gartner in a few weeks on value measurement. And one of the key areas when we're trying to understand what we should be measuring as far as the value we're bringing back to the organization is understanding how the key business capabilities are measured and what their KPIs are, and how we can help the owners of those business capabilities make their KPIs better. And if you align your value measurement that way, then they see you and you're helping them make their KPIs better and do what they do better. Then they see you as a strategic partner and an enabler of strategic advantage. So it makes much more sense to align your value measurement and the things that you're trying to provide to the business around the business capabilities, rather than this lofty strategy alignment that we've been writing and thinking about for well over 20 years. So according to Gartner, by 2015, primary factor determining incentive compensation for CIOs will be the amount of new revenue generated from IT initiatives versus traditional measures such as budget or headcount and their team's value in delivering on time and on budget. Those are traditional measures. Gartner and others claim that that's all going to be out the window and it's going to be value to the business. And I think you're starting to see that today. So some examples. Just some simple examples. Telecom services. The old thinking, negotiations are primarily about cost, trying to get the best cost for our telecom services. New thinking, discussions focus on networking, sales, all the socioeconomic implications associated with it, discussions such as social media, voice and data conversions. What used to be purely a technical function has evolved in many organizations to a strategic service. So it's not just about cost. It's about all the things that particular telecom services can enable us to do for our business. So, and if you don't talk to the business in terms of value back to the business, they're going to continue to perceive IT as a utility, and IT won't matter. So, again, the thinking about IT and telecom services, I think, is a simple example. If you're just thinking about it as a cost to be managed, that's how you're going to be treated. If you're thinking about what you do as a source of competitive advantage and business value, and can articulate it that way, then you're going to be treated accordingly and eventually. So another simple example, the IT budgeting process. Old thinking, most IT budgets spent on sustaining the business. That leads the CIO or CEO and others, CFO. We're spending all this money and getting nothing of value or little of value. So that they see it as a utility mindset, a cost to be managed, and that's not a fun environment to be in. Newer thinking in organizations, you've got a portfolio approach where the budget's allocated. We looked at some of this in 871 between different types of investments in IT. Gartner calls them run the business, grow the business, transform the business, where some are keep the lights on, but the transform the business are those capabilities and projects that are going to take you to the next level, to your R&D and your forward-looking projects. And that really what we're trying to do over time is shift the funding from primarily keep the lights on to more funding around the R&D and new ventures. And if you can do that, then over time it leads to IT becoming viewed as a strategic enabler of the business rather than this utility mindset that we're all trying to shake. And we'll just do one more here. Value communication. And we talked quite a bit about this in 871, and we'll talk more about this in a couple weeks with Scott Bittler. But how you think and communicate your value. If you communicate network use, application supported, projects completed on time, headcount reductions, that's how you're containing costs. So how we're spending money and containing costs. And you're going to be thought about as a cost to be contained, if that's all you talk about. So a better discussion to have is their contribution to sales and how IT has contributed to drive revenue, how we're contributing to making money and adding business value. When you focus on that type of conversation and metrics, then you're defining your value to the organization, and then you're thought about differently, and the conversations that you engage in are much different. If you get a chance, we won't take the time to do it today. We looked at, I think we pointed this out a bit in 871. If you go on YouTube and search for Greg the Architect, if you haven't done this, just go on YouTube. There are several short videos in this series. One is called ROI of the Beholder. It really kind of debunks or makes fun of kind of the traditional ROI mentality that many organizations have. So if you get a chance, take a look at it. I think when somebody takes the time to make a parody of something, that really shows you how much of an issue that particular item is in the industry. So, and I think the Greg the Architect series points out a number of things that I think are going to hit home with many of you. Again, these slides aren't coming up correctly. So moving from alignment to business performance, this type of thinking goes beyond traditional alignment exercises. You need to understand if there's been an impact on the business, and how do we do this? A quote I think is appropriate. The mind is everything. What you think, you become. I think in many cases in life that's true. So if we think about this, and going going beyond our traditional alignment thinking that many of us have been conditioned to think in our education and in the way we're often structured and act in our organizations. If you think about the factors that might inhibit this change in thinking, there are many. And I think slowly over time this is starting to change, but I still see many organizations where they've got a ways to go. And some examples. Here's a Wall Street Journal article suggested that the following factors are keeping many IT departments disconnected from the business. So mindset differences between management staff and IT staff. They think differently, they talk differently, this disconnect. The IT is over here and the rest of us are over here. Language differences, and those language differences come down to, things like we've been talking about, how you express your value. If you're expressing it in terms that are meaningful to the rest of the business. And honestly, I think some of this could be, well, a lot of this could be rectified if we had better structured business schools that had robust IT departments. And maybe, I don't know, MIS isn't the answer. MIS is on its way out and should be. Most of those programs haven't progressed much since the 80s in many cases. But a new, and I'm biased, obviously, but I believe enterprise architecture could be this missing element that's needed in business schools. And I've talked with a few business schools about this. I haven't seen anybody moving towards it. It's going to take a very enlightened dean and some enlightened faculty. But there's a definite vacuum in business schools today. MIS is being phased out. Nothing's really replacing it. But I think more so than ever before, everybody needs a knowledge of technology and what it can do for the business. And having that education occur in another college, I think is just we've got to change this. And it's not. I wish I knew how to do it. I think you need a major business school to have an enlightened dean and implement something like this, and then have it be a success, and then maybe others will follow. But I really believe enterprise architecture could be that next evolution, if you will, of MIS that many business schools are searching for today. So I've talked with some, at Penn State, we have our College of Information Sciences and Technology, which was set up to be this middle ground between business and computer science and more hardcore IT disciplines. So we're unique that way in that we were set up to be that middle ground and have as much focus on business as we do on technology. But most universities don't have anything like us. They either have the business school, which typically is very technology light, or you go into computer science and engineering, which is typically then way down in the weeds and very technology heavy with very little business. And really, what we need is more the coming together in the middle, or having business schools beef up their focus on technology and enterprise technologies. So anyhow, so that would help with the language differences and the social and cultural differences and mindset differences. Flaws in governance. We've talked a lot about governance. Governance is the number one reason most enterprise initiatives fail. Difficulty in managing rapidly changing technology as well. So those are some of the items that the Wall Street Journal suggested are keeping this alignment paradigm alive and well in many organizations. We get back to this chart. I like to use this chart because I think it really spells things out clearly. This is the traditional worldview on the left, and this is a better worldview that we need to get to in many organizations on the right. And still locking up on me. Okay, and that is the end of that slide deck. So I just wanted to hit some of the historical trends in alignment, some of the current thinking in alignment, and then we think about how enterprise architecture can play into this. And I really believe that, and I've seen this in a few companies, where they focus on trying to align the IT organization better with the owners of the business capabilities, and that was one of the major facets of our value measurement model that we presented in 871. And I'm starting to see more and more organizations. Merck Pharmaceuticals is one that I know has tighter alignment with their EA folks and the different owners of the business capabilities, and it seems to be working well for them. So why don't I stop there and answer any questions if anybody would like to have a discussion on any parts of what was presented, and then I'd like to jump in the last 15 or 20 minutes or so and talk about the Common Perspective draft paper that I sent out earlier today. I'd like to give you a little history around the purpose of the paper, what we're trying to do with the paper, and then if you have had a chance to look over it, answer any questions, and get a little feedback from the group as well. So why don't I stop? Anybody have any comments or questions before we move into the perspective paper?
Hey, Dr. Cameron, this is Stan. And Just one comment about that tight alignment and those issues. I'm curious if that could be just an exposing of poor strategy. And you mentioned the change in strategy as well. I wonder if being tightly aligned just exposes that poor strategy.
Well, that's a good point. Yeah. There are some authors that say that if the strategy's failed and if the business isn't doing the right things and you're aligned well with that, then you're not doing the right things either. So that's a valid argument. Now, according to Porter, he feels in his research that in 70% or so of the cases, it's not because the strategy is necessarily bad, it's because it was poorly executed and implemented. So I guess you could say in the other 30% or so, then they had poor strategy, and if you're well aligned with that, the bad strategy, then it's not gonna, you're not gonna get good results, obviously.
And I guess I got another one too, if no one else has anything. The working with capabilities with the business has been kind of a gold mine in my experience. Not only are you talking with the business at something that they understand with that capability you're delivering, you help them deliver, right? Not 100% of it, but a good portion of it anyway. It's enabled us to expose IT costs to that and relate revenue to that cost for those specific capabilities, which has really been eye-opening and has helped do that. Wish the business would take a little more of that and enroll with it, which really kind of ties back to your value communication, right? So just want to share that.
Yeah, I'm glad you're connecting that because I couldn't agree more. The stuff's all, in my opinion, it's all intertwined. If you can align your value metrics and your value measurement plan and your communication plan, as you pointed out, around the business capabilities, then you're measuring the things that they care about and the things that add value to the business, and they over time they'll see you as an enabler of a strategic asset to what they do. It takes a while to get there, and so it doesn't happen overnight, obviously, and you got to have the right people too. Getting it's one thing, but in a number of organizations, I think there's a dearth of people that can carry on those business conversations and be that interface to the owners of the business capabilities. And if you can be that person or you can find those people, they're worth their weight in gold. That's the biggest problem I see, is not enough people that can play that role, be that business enabler, and then bring it back and work with the IT organization and have that good understanding of how they're going to bring it back and develop solutions and et cetera. But those people, in my opinion, are worth their weight in gold.
I have a quick question. This is Joe. On the slide, I noticed number 31 was about the capabilities. It was a very interesting slide that, this is what enables change and this, changing the focus for IT. However, I can still see that this could be, sort of looking at the bottom-up approach, right? IT develops different gizmos and technology, and business can go and shop and find out what they can use. So I still see that with this approach, it's good, it's conceptually great, but we still need IT to be very business savvy so they can really sit on the same table, right? Versus...
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and if I gave the impression otherwise, that wasn't my intent. No, IT needs to be very business savvy and be able to. And I think if I'm understanding you correctly, the slide you might be referring to is when we talk about presenting different options, and by that it's different options to solve your business problem. That IT can provide you. So not necessarily just developing gizmos for gizmos' sake, but understanding the business problem well enough that you can come up with potential options to solve that problem. And every option has its pros and cons. So, I always say to my students, if you're only telling me the pros, you're either you don't understand it well enough or you're lying to me, because every solution has some downsides to them. So I want to hear, the pros and the cons, and tell me what you're going to do to mitigate the cons. And so that's when we get into presenting solutions. Every solution is going to have its plus side and minus side, but hopefully the people developing the solutions then understand what those pluses and minuses are for the business and can articulate them and how they can be mitigated, et cetera. That's a very difficult and robust conversation to have. And but you need people that can get to that level of understanding and analysis.
Yeah, and I like this CIO compensation comment there in one of the slides. I think this is probably the key of changing mindset, that IT is actually creating value for business, for profitability or revenue, whatever, right? And it's not only CIO, but every manager and the IT person should understand that. So this is a great observation of the trend, I guess.
Yeah, I look at that as a positive, because if they see you as adding value to the business, then you're going to be treated differently. If it's just a cost to be managed, then that's not a fun place to be. If you're just the cost that they're trying to just squeeze more cost containment out of you, that's not a fun world to live in. It's much better to be seen as a source of strategic advantage and investment. And if we make strategic investments in IT, it's going to pay off to the business and et cetera. It's just a much more dynamic environment to be working in.
This is Stan again. I think that also supports the business capability approach, because I think sometimes we get bogged down by we're trying to align with this huge IT strategy. And that strategy obviously trickles down to those capabilities that are being delivered, and then the supporting capabilities that help deliver that, and IT being on the capability. And then by getting the capability, you can expose that much easier, as opposed to trying to roll everything up to the top of the business as well.
I couldn't agree more. Yeah. But it's going to take some new thinking on the part of, the people that lead your IT organization. And, there's a lot of very traditional practices and thinking out there.
Hey, Dr. Cameron, this is Tony. One thing I thought was kind of interesting is we keep saying that we want IT to be more business savvy, but one thing I think that's missed a lot is actually having business be more IT savvy. Being as somebody who is in the middle of this, I'm in my job normally, I'm a kind of a liaison between the IT group and the business groups. And it's amazing how many times the business side believes IT is magic and it's just going to happen. It doesn't need to have any kind of strategy, and you're just going to show up and it's all going to work. So I think it's definitely a two-way street. Of IT needs to be able to step up and understand how to design things properly to complement the business, but the business also needs to understand kind of the IT piece of it, which I find it tends to be lacking.
I couldn't agree more. That's what we got on my little tirade about the educational system. So if you look into business schools, the accounting folks take marketing classes, they take finance classes, and vice versa. So they all have an idea of what the other functional parts of the business do. Nobody, or very few people, depending on your business school, take anything that has to do with IT. If they take any type of technology in most business schools, it's learning how to use spreadsheets and maybe a simple database and things like that. There's no real understanding at any depth of enterprise technologies, what they can do for an organization, and really, I think enterprise architecture as well, kind of this bridge between business and IT and strategy and execution. I think there's so much that can be done there in the educational system. But again, it's going to take some deans and faculty that get it, and most of them, frankly, don't. But I couldn't. I agree. It's got to be a two-way street. It's not just the IT folks that need more business. It's all the functional areas of business need much more in-depth knowledge of what IT can do, and some foundational understanding of of technology, and there's just so much that could be done. I'm actually pushing our MBA program. I know the new director of our MBA program to let me do an elective EA course for the MBAs. and see how it's received, and because right now they do no technology at all in the MBA program, none to speak of, and so he's mulling it over and talking about it with some of the other faculty, and I hopefully they'll let me try it, because I think if I can get in there, I think it's going to be very well received. But yeah, no, I fully agree with you.
Well, and the problem with the business not understanding the IT capabilities is that they do treat it as a cost center, and I view it as it's really like a dance. And the big question is, who's leading? If we talk about IT business alignment, the business is leading. And if you get to this model, IT can lead, and we have a whole lot better understanding of what the capabilities are that we can unleash. And businesses are going to have very big problems if all they're doing is cutting costs and trying to squeeze extra nickels out of IT.
Yep, I agree. But I keep going back to this, but I really feel we train our children in our universities to think this way on the IT and business sides, and the way things are. So you kind of fall back with how you've been trained and what you know, in many cases. And I really think we need to blow up parts of our educational system and restructure them. But boy, once programs get put in place, it takes an act of God to change things. We're just very, and I'm not just talking Penn State. This is academia in general. To change the structure of a traditional business school, it's very, very difficult. Like I said, it's going to take some real maverick entrepreneurial dean that gets it, and maybe in time. I'm cautiously optimistic, because there's if you do any reading about higher ed today, everybody says we're in this bubble, it's going to burst. We need to. There was just Moody's downgraded. I think the higher education sector, and because of the lack of innovation in the business models in higher education, and I couldn't agree more. So maybe sometimes things don't change until they hit rock bottom. So maybe if we go through some kind of shakeout in higher ed, which I think is coming, then maybe some of these concepts that in good times people wouldn't consider, when things get bad, then they start looking at models that they wouldn't have looked at in better times. So we'll see. But I think we're an enabler of the problem, not a solution of the problem, in the way we have our programs, our educational programs structured.
Dr. Cameron, it's more like I'm coming from the business point of view. Let's say even within the same company, every business unit will be competing with each other. Now we are making IT part of taking it to the business unit. See, or do you think IT will be competing with its own suppliers to gain the business of the business units it is supporting? For example, IT is becoming more like a service provider, selling its services or positioning its expertise with different business units in a single company. Getting some services from internal IT might be more expensive compared to getting the same service from a supplier.
And do you have the ability to go out to an external provider if IT is too expensive?
Yes, that's what some of the companies pushing. I mean, every business unit has its own P&L, right? And at the end of the day, they have to show the P&L, right?
And I would argue in that case, this gets back to the car, IT doesn't matter. There are aspects of what we do in IT that can be outsourced, and I think, and those are probably those are the costs to be contained. And separating them from the more strategic aspects of what you do, I think is important. So it's not necessarily a bad thing to let some parts get outsourced. They're probably not they're more of the utility functions anyhow in most cases, and then let's focus on the strategic value that we're adding. And some of that strategic value can be figuring out what to outsource, what to keep in-house, and how to deal with the outsourcing relationships and everything that goes with that as well. But I don't see that as as a bad thing to be able to, if somebody can do it cheaper than you can do it, then let them do it. And then focus on being a strategic resource to the business.
So we need to evaluate our own internal teams when you do the evaluation as part of architecture framework. Those metrics have to be defined internally also, what we can get. I mean, it is not only applicable for IT. If you come up with start thinking like that, it can be applicable to the business units also, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, all parts of the business. Look, we outsource accounting functions. We outsource HR functions. In some companies, they outsource most of their HR or large parts of their accounting. This is, this type of conversation and analysis isn't limited just to IT today. It's in all parts of the business. What do we keep in-house, and what is strategic, what don't we want to outsource, and what are the more utility functions of what we do that we can outsource? So yeah, that's not an IT only discussion by any means.
Yeah. I mean, as of now, IT is more like it is becoming into like a cloud service provider, right? IT as a service or X as a service, right? So, I mean, I was wondering how this cloud will impact EA. Do you think at some point EA will become a service? So that
that's a question I've been getting asked a lot lately. Does cloud let me word this correctly. Does cloud mean we don't need EA anymore? That we're just putting everything out there and letting somebody else handle it? And my argument would be no. If anything, it makes EA even more important because you've got to, not everything should go into the cloud. So how are you determining what to put in the cloud, what to keep in-house? The stuff that's in the cloud, it still needs, by and large, to integrate with other systems in your environment. So, who's doing the analysis of what the, integration points are? Can the cloud provider provide those integration points for you? What to put in the cloud, what not to put in the cloud? And that's not a one-time decision. So some things, perhaps, that you put in the cloud, maybe it's not working out as well and might need to be brought back in. And then conversely, over time, as technologies get better, something that maybe you decided not to put in the cloud today, maybe 2 or 3 years from now, is a candidate for the cloud. If any, and then what you see in organizations without any type of enterprise-wide planning and coordination, you get all types of cloud vendors. You get what some people call spaghetti clouds, because you have all these different departments forming relationships with third-party providers with no real central planning or oversight and coordination, and it just becomes a mess. So if anything, the need for enterprise architecture is just as important, maybe even more important when we start getting into cloud environments. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I want to see how it's...
You don't sound like you buy it. Well, we'll keep going. What questions or what concerns do you have?
I mean, business strategy has to be in-house, irrespective of, right, where you want to go in your business, being a number one, and these are the revenues.
Yeah, you're not going to outsource your strategic planning.
That's true. By keeping strategy inside, and after that, everything is number game, right? It's pure analytics, right? Where are our costs? Where is the profit? Where is the loss? Which business is doing what? Which one to cut down? Those are the things that we can centralize. Once we define that high-level framework and keep the strategy inside, EA is not just strategy plus all the other things. So within the EA, we can keep strategy in-house and move everything to the cloud, right? And as long as we can have the numbers, metrics.
So, okay, I'm not sure if I follow it. Let me just spit this back to you and see if I'm articulating this correctly. So you're saying we keep everything in-house, and then EA will allow us to put everything in the cloud, or maybe most things into the cloud, and is your point that EA is not needed after that point, or what's where you go? I'm not sure if I follow your point.
What I'm trying to say is, whatever, let's say, when you define the once the strategy is defined, right, we'll keep it.
But strategy is always being tweaked, and it's not a one-time and you're done thing.
Yes, that's the reason we cannot. Strategy is always moving based on external trends. If you keep in-house, we cannot move that fast with the in-house technology. If you keep the technology in the cloud, so we can move faster from the technology point of view. Do you agree?
Maybe. I mean, theoretically,
right?
the cloud should give you more agility. But if you're structured internally and you have a good EA group that is this bridge between strategy and execution to enable hopefully better agility internally. Depending, I'm not a big believer that everything that we do is going to go into the cloud. I think some things are good candidates for the cloud, and other functions maybe not so much. This is a subject of debate. Everybody has different opinions. Some people feel, as you just suggested, that everything's going to be in the cloud, and we're not going to need anything at all in-house. Maybe in some businesses that's true, and maybe in some small businesses where they go. But yeah, I just in mid-sized and large organizations, I just don't see us putting every single application, every single thing that we do into the cloud. At least not today. Maybe down the road, but So I think the decision of what goes in, what doesn't go in is very organization specific. It's not an easy. In every organization, this particular type of app should go into the cloud. I think it's very context specific, and there's so many variables that you need to do the analysis that you would do with enterprise architecture to make the decisions that work for the organization at that point in time, realizing as strategy changes, as technology progresses, as other things progress, that all these variables are constantly in flux, and you need to can revisit that analysis periodically to and adjust your decisions accordingly. That might be putting more things into the cloud. It could be, in some cases, people bring things back in-house because it's not working out in the cloud. But, again, these variables are constantly in flux, so I see EA as a needed component to, keep that analysis up to date. And as, like I said, as strategy changes, as technology changes, et cetera, the decisions we make today might be totally different, a year from now.
Okay. It is different from vertical to vertical. If you're a technology provider, that's one thing. Let's say if you're a healthcare
vertical to vertical, organization to organization within that vertical as well. Everybody's got a different landscape, different organization, so it's tough to generalize, in my opinion.
Okay. Basically, I'm looking into EA as a combination of technology, business processes, business architecture, and the way business operations, and then strategy. So business processes also can be moved to the cloud. For example, take Salesforce.com. Using Salesforce.com, you can almost put 90% of your sales operations in the cloud. Do you agree?
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, right? I'm looking at certain things. I know the cloud architecture is not there yet, but we are slowly getting. So if you take if you take any organization and keep strategy and your own customer services, rest of the things you can move it to the cloud easily, including business processes. The way, that's. I might be wrong, but
No. I think so. so what's your? I'm not going to argue that in some businesses, it's going to be easy to move a large part of their landscape to the cloud, but not in all. So what's your? I'm still struggling to. What's your point? Is it to say that EA could be outsourced, or EA is not as important, or I'm not quite sure where you're going with your argument.
What I'm trying to say is I want to keep, within the EA, I want to see what is the things that we can keep within the cloud, because that's how, and focus just on the strategy. That makes organizations more efficient. So if you think about painting the EA...
Okay. So I don't think I'm going to, I think I'm going to agree with you 100% if I'm understanding you correctly. So with EA, you can better determine what are the commodities, the things that could be put into the cloud, and then focus your internal efforts more on strategic concerns.
Yes. So
yeah,
when you
I would agree with that.
Yeah. Don't concentrate on just on the business architecture, technical architecture, all these things. If you try to do all these things, EA will become more like a burden for any organization, right? So that's the reason most of the public sector organizations are failing in EA, because they are coming up with this glorious documentation. They're sitting on the shelf, and there is a poor.
That's a big problem in the federal government. They're just, in many cases, they just produce artifacts to comply with Klinger Co. And it's not really part of their operations. They're not really trying to use it to, better their business strategy or to, link to better improve their operations. It's more of a reporting exercise, unfortunately, in many parts of the government.
And by looking at them, even the private industries, when we talk about EA, they said they're not quite comfortable going through the EA, developing a complete EA, complete organization-wide strategy, because no organization, no company has a single EA strategy. Within that, there are many business units. Each one, they have their own P&L. Each one of them is fighting, right? Take any company. Show me two SVPs that are closely aligned and supporting EA. I mean, when you get into that SVP level, everyone is watching their own P&L. They won't cooperate. You cannot come up with a single EA strategy for the entire company. And if you talk to anyone, they will definitely say, the people who are working in the real world say, you're smoking something. So,
yeah, I'm not arguing with that at all. And we see this here at Penn State. They're in the very early stages of starting an EA practice. And one of the big problems they're going to have is just what you pointed out. We've got all these silos that have their own, budgets and their own little fiefdoms, if you will, and they don't really want to work and think across all the silos. They don't want this enterprise-wide planning, because it's going to mean some loss of authority, some loss of budget, et cetera. And frankly, in our case, and I say this to anybody that'll listen, if they really want this to work, they're going to have to blow up some of these silos, and it's going to take a lot of support and continuous support from the very senior levels, from the provost and the president, because all the owners of these silos are going to use all their political capital and sway to try to derail this and say it's not working or we shouldn't do this and blah, blah, blah. And the people at the top have to get it and have to be ready to see it through to the end. And I hope that's the case here, because otherwise, it's going to have very limited effectiveness.
Or the other option is moving EA to the cloud and keep strategy internally at each organization level, then everyone looking at EA as their friend. You know what I mean?
Now, when you say move EA to the cloud, I don't, no, because if EA is a strategic function and an enabler of strategy,
yes,
which is how I view it, you really can't outsource that. So so I'm not sure if I understand what you mean by sending EA to the cloud.
No. Strategy you cannot outsource. Keep the strategy inside. Move all the business processes, systems, applications, technology, whatever the other things.
But that's not all EA encompasses. So you're saying move your technology architecture or large chunks of your technology architecture to the cloud,
including processes. Just the
Well, processes would be inherent in the applications.
Yeah.
Yeah.
options, yeah. So focus mainly on your own.
I'm okay with that. I'm just not okay with the way with saying that that's putting EA into the cloud. That's putting, aspects of your technology architecture into the cloud.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, because EA if you're looking at EA as more than just IT architecture, and you're looking at enterprise-wide architecture, enterprise-wide linkage with strategy. I realize that that's not how many people look at it. They look at EA as solely the IT architecture. And if that's how you're defining EA, then I'm okay with what you said. But I have perhaps a broader definition or view. And actually, this is a good segue into the perspective paper, because this is exactly why we're writing this paper. So if you're okay, and if there are any other questions, this might be a good time to segue into this, because I think it's going to address some of the issues that perhaps you're trying to get at with the way you're framing things and with your argument. I think conceptually, I agree. Go ahead.
I just had a very quick comment about this cloud discussion, because we recently, I think there's a big misconception out there that cloud is cheaper. We actually recently did an assessment where we put the right metric. Basically, the problem with cloud is that people are looking at cost. They're not looking at value. And it should be value that should be measured and not cost. And
there's a lot of elements to value and cost. I know I've seen similar things where people were actually bringing it in-house and it didn't work. So I don't believe that cloud is the end-all be-all to everything either. I think in certain cases it works well, and other cases maybe not so well. But you need enterprise architecture to do that analysis and the ongoing analysis to see how well it's working. And make the decision of whether to continue, bring it back in house, and also say it didn't work now at this point in time. Technology is going to change. Everything's going to be different. 3 years from now, you need that ongoing analysis. So if it didn't work now, it doesn't mean it won't work in the future. But you need okay. But if you're not doing that type of continual analysis, you're probably not going to make the right decisions.
I totally agree, and that's exactly what I was going to say. So,
yeah, no, I fully agree. Any other comments before we move on to the paper? I know it's getting late, so I'll try to wrap up the paper here in 15 minutes or so. This is an extremely rough draft. I even hesitated sending it out to you folks, but I thought that would be an interesting discussion. This is all going to change. I actually got a whole stack of comments from different people in the organization, so the final product's going to the nature is going to stay the same, but how things are organized and even the analogies that are used, some of these things are going to change. But the purpose of this paper is to set a common, what we're calling a perspective. It's kind of a definitional document on what enterprise architecture is, how it relates to other parts of the organization, and what value does it bring to the organization. These are kind of age-old questions, and there's so many different perspectives, definitions, and it's a mess out there, as you all know. So this will be the first time that 20 professional organizations from around the globe came together to do something like this. So when this comes out, it's going to be hard for people to sling arrows at. It's easy if I put out something, you all can sling arrows at me, or if your organization puts out something, we can all easily sling arrows at that. But having a group of 20 professional organizations come out with something, that's going to be a little harder for people to sling arrows at and say it's all wet. So we start. I'll just skip down through some of the major sections and hit some of the high points. Just an introduction, the goals of the paper. I think that's
You're planning to share it? You're not sharing, Gagan.
I'm sorry?
You're planning to share the document on the screen?
Well, I sent it to you all today.
Yeah, okay.
PDF. No, I don't. If you have it, if you can bring it up.
Yeah, no problem.
So we got an introduction, the goal of the paper, the use of the term enterprise architecture. This is something that we wanted to get out. In enterprise architecture, the terms used primarily three different ways. We can talk about the process of enterprise architecture, what we actually do. You can talk about the artifacts as the enterprise architecture. So some people, when you use the term, they visualize the artifacts, the outputs. Others visualize the function or the group that does it. So we wanted to make a distinction here. So what we're calling the group or the function within the organization, we're calling that the enterprise architecture practice. We're using enterprise architecture for the context of this paper as a verb, as the process of what we do. And then the artifacts are the outputs of enterprise architecture. So that's the unanimous consensus, and that's how we want to position the term enterprise architecture, and that's how we want to evolve the use of the term going forward. So then the three major questions that were decided to answer. What is it? What differentiates it from other functions in the organization? And what value does it bring to an organization? Again, this is all still very much a work in process. Started with using the city planning analogy that I'm sure many of you have seen before and have used in this class. We're kind of going back and forth on that analogy. I think it helps people, at least at a high level, get what it is that we do. Most people, I think, can at least have some idea of what a city planner does. And I think, while it's not a perfect analogy, I think it does with the lay person. And essentially the audience for this paper is the general public. So my personal goal is, to be able to take this into the marketing people or the accounting people or whomever, and they read it and they're like, okay, we get it now. We get what you guys do. We didn't before, but we kind of get it at a high level now. That's the real goal of this particular paper. I talk about the traditional practice areas, which we've hit in this class, and the typical generic process that most methodologies and frameworks try to follow. Then we hit, and again, I'm just kind of going through this quickly. Then we talk a little bit about Len Feskin's model, because as we look at enterprise architecture, not just solely as IT architecture, but as true enterprise-wide architecture, it really necessitates a need to express what we do in terms that all business understands. So that when we're talking about EA, we're not just talking about the IT infrastructure and architecture, as is the case in most organizations today. So it points to a possible future vision, future evolution. Talk about what differentiates it from other practices in the organization. And here we're getting into, essentially, what's your vision and scope for enterprise architecture? If it's solely, primarily IT, then many of the disciplines that we talk about here, like portfolio management, for example, would be a contributor to it. However, if the vision is true enterprise-wide architecture, where you're an enterprise-wide resource, not just within IT, which honestly I haven't seen any organization that that is anywhere near that yet. So this is kind of forward-looking. If we're going to get out of our IT roots and be true enterprise-wide architecture, then some disciplines like portfolio management and this all-encompassing vision, you could make the case that they should come under IT in that particular world, and some other functions that are traditionally under EA, not IT. That portfolio management would fall under EA if you're doing true enterprise-wide architecture. No organization. I'm going to go out on a limb and say no organization is there today. EA is still primarily an IT discipline today, so that things like portfolio management and the other things that are listed here are contributors to it, but do not, obviously sit underneath it. However, if you're going enterprise-wide, I think that is warranted. So then we go on to talk about the value that it brings to the organization. Again, we're still fleshing these out, but let me find. I wanted to point out a couple So what we're trying to do here is talk about the current state in organizations, but then also point to the discussion that many organizations are having today. If it's going to be an enterprise-wide architecture, enterprise-wide resource, should it sit in IT long-term? And Gartner claims, and I think I've mentioned this before, that they have about a dozen clients that are getting ready to move EA out of IT and put it under a business function, maybe something like strategic planning, which I think makes sense if that's, if your goal is to not have it just be an IT resource and have, maybe you can argue whether strategic planning is the right home or not, but if it's this bridge between strategy and execution, that seems to make some sense. I haven't seen anybody do it yet. Gartner claims there's people getting ready to do it. We'll see. So we talk about, some of this possible future positioning for EA as well, which, like I said, I haven't seen anybody do it yet. So what we're trying to do here is get in terms that hopefully everybody can understand what it is and why it's important. So like I said, this is going to look very different in the final version. Our goal is to have this ready for a large summit meeting that we're having in May, beginning of May. So we want to ratify this and officially release it in May. So if you've had a chance to take a look at it, please give me your feedback, ask questions, and we'll try to wrap up in the next 10 or 15 minutes. Any questions or comments? And if you want to if you haven't read it yet, I know we just sent it out today. Take a look at it, and feel free to email me, or if you want to schedule a time to talk one-on-one, be happy to do that as well. Any questions, comments?
So what is the intended audience for this article? What you're targeting?
The public. So like I said, the goal would be to take this to somebody that maybe has only heard of the term before. Maybe they even haven't heard of the term. That they read it and they get it. They get what enterprise architecture is and what it can do for an organization. Because I think that's what we're missing out there today. There's so many. If you're, like I said, if you could take it into the marketing people or the accountants and they read it and they get it, or take it to any of the functional business units and they read it and they get it. Because right now these people, they go online and they Google enterprise architecture. Lord knows what they find, and it just confuses them more than anything else because there's so much garbage out there. There's so much differing opinions, perspectives, etc. We're trying to get past all of that and get something out there that the rest of the business can, at least at a high level, comprehend. So that's the audience. And then there'll be future papers that'll come from this that'll drill down more deeply in different parts of the profession and different parts of the paper. So we're trying to keep everything very high level at this point. Any questions or comments? Take a look at it. Like I said, this is very rough at this point, and I hesitated whether I should send it out at this point, but I thought, well, I'll give you a view into what's coming down the pike and what this organization's working on. So hopefully, if we're successful in May, the 20 professional organizations will ratify this paper, and then the different analyst firms and press will be writing about this, and there'll be a lot of critics, of course, in this space. There's plenty of critics, but again, it's going to be much tougher to sling arrows at something that was jointly developed by all of these professional organizations. Go ahead. Does somebody have a question or a comment?
Yeah, this is Doug. I was just wondering about, are you going to list those organizations in the reference sections?
Yes. Actually, not just the organizations, but the representatives from those organizations. So each organization has a primary and an alternate representative to this group. So their names and organizations will be listed. And it's actually listed in the working draft. I pulled it out when I sent it out to you folks, because I didn't feel comfortable sharing all the names and everything at this point until we're totally finished with it, because it's still very much a work in process. Any other questions, comments?
Can this be shared with?
Not yet, please. Not yet, because it's still very. We've got a ways to go before we're ready for public release. I mean, if it helps you to, you know, that's why another reason I hesitated to send it out. I don't want this to get sent out in some distribution list. It's not ready for that yet, I'd hate to have it, get out there and it's not. The end product's probably going to look very different from this document. So if you can wait till May, then once the official version's ready, then you can share that with whomever you'd like. But I wouldn't feel comfortable doing that at this point. Any other questions or comments? Okay, well, if you look over it and you see things you like or things that you question or what have you, feel free to shoot me an email. This is going to go, like I said, go through a number of iterations. The representatives from the different professional organizations will go back and forth on different things. Then we have a small group of external reviewers from Gartner and Forrester and Cutter then they're going to get to view it and offer their comments. And then we should be, after all those iterations and revisions, then we should be ready to officially release something and then have everybody stand behind it and endorse it, which will be a big deal because nothing like that's been done to date. Okay, if there are no other questions or comments, thanks for hanging in there so long tonight. Sorry for the length of the session. And if you have any, like I said, if after you go through the paper you have any questions or any comments, please send them my way. Okay. And if there's nothing else, then we'll call it an evening. Good night, everybody.
Good night. Good night.